Right, hello guys, and welcome back to part 2 of my small 2-part series where I'm trying to prepare you the best for the epic version of the Desert Perpetual raid, not just contest, the normal version as well. Today we are covering all of the builds that you will want to be using in this raid for every single class, including things like stats, armor archetypes, armor set bonuses, all sorts of things related to subclass and so on. All of the best advice all in one video relating to your builds. And of course, all of this taking into account the Notswap modifier and the conditions that said modifier imposes on our builds in the first place. Before we continue, I would encourage you to watch the previous video where we went over damage strategies that I'm going to recommend to you to use in the epic raid. We went over a couple in the last video, so definitely watch that if you haven't already. But also catch the regular raid guide as well if you need a refresher on how the base raid functions, because the epic raid is going to be built on those foundations. Also, today's video is going to be a collaborative video. The Hunter and Warlock sections are going to be covered by G- and Toidy, both of my teammates respectively. So make sure to show them some love if you haven't already, and also those classes are their respective mains, as Titan is my respective main, so I thought it would be best in terms of advice for them to give their takes because that's what they're playing. But first we are starting with Titan, which is my main, so let's get cracking. So in an effort to not make my section too long, I'm just going to go over all of the builds that I use on my Titan, and for me personally, primarily I'm going to be playing on Arc Titan. The reason I'm going to be playing on Arc Titan is because I'm the most comfortable on Arc Titan. It's what I played for all of the previous contest experience, and I have a build with Prismatic on it. I'll get to that. However, Arc Titan is my comfort pick. Same applies to you if you are more comfortable on Arc Titan, and this applies to the Titan viewers, of course. Definitely go with what you're most comfortable with. However, I will say that Strand, Stasis, Solar, and Void, pretty much a no-go. You could make an argument for Strand, maybe, but I'm not going to be playing any of these classes. I have made my mind up. It is going to be Arc or Prismatic. So for the subclass itself, I am always going to be on Storm's Keep and Knockout. Could make an argument for Touch of Thunder instead of Knockout, but to me, Knockout is just the most consistent aspect for really good heals and making me amplified, which is going to make it so enemies are less accurate when targeting me, improving my survivability, giving me damage resist, and so on. Supers, obviously Thunder Crash, Rally Barricade, Thunderclap, please use Thunderclap, trust me, this one is good. Then Pulse Grenade, and for the fragments, we have Sparkle of Resistance, Shock, Frequency, and Magnitude. These don't really matter too much. Magnitude and Frequency and Resistance are the main important ones. You don't have to run with Shock if you don't want to. You can swap this for something else like Ions, for example, but I like these four. So the main thing that I want to address in this video is basically your stats going into a Notswap environment, because Notswap is going to govern how you treat things so much. You know, it's a whole can of worms, and there are a few things you ought to know about Notswap that are very important with regards to making your builds. The first is that if you have a running loadout, for example, your damaged loadout cannot have any different major stat mods. So if on my gauntlets, on my damaged loadout, I have a weapons mod, and yes, by the way, this counts for any tuning slots as well if you have tier 5 gear, these mods must be identical, because basically people have tested this in Gambit, which right now has Notswap on it, by the way, and it appears the version of Notswap that is in Gambit is the one that is going to be used in the raid because it is very harsh for some reason. Whether it's intended or not, I don't know, but essentially, even in just the last few days, people have discovered that you must have the same stat mods on your stat mod slot and your tuning slot in order for you to keep your abilities, keep your ammo, keep everything, and abide by the Notswap rules. So on a running loadout here, I have a minor weapon, 2 major weapon, a minor super, and another major weapon mod, which will remain identical when I swap to my damaged loadout. Same goes for any of the tuning slots. They all stay the same, cannot be changed, so just be aware of that. That is very important. The other thing is that because we are on Notswap, you basically have to run your damaged loadout at all times, which is kind of awkward, but you know, you can kind of get around it, and the way that I get around it is by using some very well-rolled gear. Specifically, we have 2 pieces of Gunner and 2 pieces of Paragon armor, and the Paragon pieces have a tertiary stat in weapons, and the Gunner pieces have a tertiary stat in super. So what that does is it lets me get 150 in my super stat and 160 in my weapon stat at all times, which is a pretty good distribution for getting very good damage for my super and my weapons. This is also with a illegal Cuirass of the Falling Star, so your stats might look a bit worse if you didn't manage to get one of these before the Edge of Fate came out, though I will say it doesn't actually matter that much. This is just from a optimization perspective. If you manage to get perfectly rolled pieces of Paragon and Gunner armor, this means you will also get a very decent amount of melee stat and grenade stat, which is still pretty good for neutral game. 60 grenade and 80 melee roughly is pretty good for neutral game. The only thing that's lacking is 30 class. However, it's not too important important, I found in practice that having 30 class is fine for my barricades. I normally do get them back. And the main reason I am able to get them back as a Titan is because of elemental benevolence. This makes it so granting allies an elemental buff like bolt charge gives class ability energy. So I'm relying on that pretty heavily to get my barricade back, but that is the key thing to be aware of. If there's anything you are wanting to take away from this as a Titan, is that you must get 2 pieces of Paragon gear and 2 pieces of Gunner gear with ideal tertiary stats if you have the time to farm for them. That is my recommendation. And then for your Cuirass, I'd probably go for a Paragon Cuirass with a tertiary stat in Super if you could. So as far as set bonuses are concerned, this is a very sort of micro optimization, but I have decided to grind out the armor, and I have gone for a 2-piece of the new smoke jumper armor and 2-piece of the ion adapter. What this is going to do is let me have it so whenever I get kills with a rocket pulse for the ion adapter, it's going to give me a 20% damage reduction for incoming splash damage, and then for smoke jumper, whenever I collect an orb of power, it's going to give me a rapidly decaying amount of damage resistance. Now in a group setting, you are going to be making lots of orbs in general, so the smoke jumper is going to be active pretty often, and more importantly, during damage, your Warlocks and your Hunters are going to be making lots of orbs with the wells and the golden guns that they use. So even during damage, think about like a Korgos beam situation, you are going to get a lot of damage resist from the orbs from the smoke jumper set. So if you are wanting to really hyper optimize your builds, I would go for a 2-piece of smoke jumper and a 2-piece of ion adapter. But overall, the more important thing is making sure you have a build with decent stats, and I have actually gone for Cuirass on my builds. The other option is Peacekeepers. However, there is somewhat of a likelihood of it being disabled. I will say that Peacekeepers or Cuirass is definitely a personal preference thing. There isn't really a case to be made for either one being much better than the other. Again, it's just personal preference. I've practiced with Cuirass all of the time, so I'm not going to use Peacekeepers because I've barely used it. So it's just basically what you're most comfortable with. I like Cuirass as well because it lets my supers hit really hard to shut down major enemies like the Wyverns in Agroios, for example, or just any sort of high health target that is causing problems. I can use my Cuirass to shut it down whenever I want to. Especially in neutral game, if I'm running 150 super, that's going to make my Cuirass do around 22% more damage, which is pretty nice on top of the 50% that it already gives to my Thunder Crash. So for the majority of my builds, and yes, I will have these dim links in the description, I have quite a few. I did go over quite a lot of the damage loadouts in the previous video, so definitely go check those out if you want to. But for me, it is just Arc for most of the time. However, I did mention at the beginning of the video that I'm going to be using Prismatic, and this is probably just for Korgos, because we found that we actually don't really need an Arc Titan on the final boss. It doesn't really make too much of a difference, and the neutral game on Prismatic is just, you know, it's better on Prismatic. So I do have a Prismatic loadout set up, and if I were to be going on Prismatic, I'm not sure if I will at the moment, but this is just the setup. It's a standard Consecration build. We've got Knockout, Consecration, a Facet of Balance, Dawn, Protection, and Courage. Courage is very important because it's going to increase the damage of your Thunder Crash by 10% if the enemy is affected by a Darkness debuff. The main Darkness debuff, in this case, is coming from New Malpais with the Catalyst, where the detonation explosions apply Unravel. So you should have this on most of the time. This is with a damage setup paired with Haliatus, though again, I think Haliatus is probably going to get disabled if you know a thing or two about this rocket, hence why I did not recommend it in yesterday's damage video. Small section I forgot to add regarding armor mods, that is to make sure you're always running Heavy Ammo Finder and Special Ammo Finder, just to increase the amount of progress you get for both of those weapons whenever you're getting kills from anything. It doesn't hurt to run these. You don't need things like a heavy-handed or dynamo or anything like that, not needed with how fast you generate your super with the damage strategies that I discussed in the previous video. And then for the rest of the mods in neutral game, these can change, by the way. You can change all of these mods for Notswap. All of these are the ones that have to stay the same. It is only the ones that affect your stats. So basically, in terms of when I swap from this loadout to this one, if my stats in my character menu stay the same, then you're good. You will not lose anything. You just need to make sure that that is the case. So when it comes to neutral game, other mods, I like to have a heavy-handed, a loader for my primary, focusing strike. All of this is kind of up to you to fit your needs. I always like to run stacks on stacks, so it is easier for me to accumulate armor charge to make special finishes more often. And then I run scavengers for my main weapons just to make sure that they are always topped up. Powerful Attraction, Special Finisher, Reaper, you get the idea. And then for the artifact, I did touch on it a little bit in the previous video, but there aren't really too many mods that are, 100% essential, except maybe Threadling Proliferation and Shoulder to Shoulder. This will make it so whenever you're near your teammates and you get precision hits from anything, it'll give you, I believe, a 20% damage resist, so make sure you have this. Also, Elemental Benevolence for the Bolt Charge stuff, Energy Acceleration, Shield Crush. You can pause and take a screenshot if you need to. But don't worry, I will have the dim links to both of these builds down in the description, but for now, I'm going to pass you on to my teammates who are going to describe the builds for the other classes. So thank you for listening to my section and enjoy theirs.
Right, hello guys. It's now my turn to showcase what I'm bringing into the epic Desert Perpetual Raid Race, and for our team, I am the Resident Support Warlock. And that means I don't get to be very creative. but that's not a bad thing. So taking a look at the one single build that I'm bringing into all encounters, we have Solar Warlock using Boots of the Assembler. These exotic boots are truly an incredible piece of support utility, and the reason we're running these is because they just got buffed, or rather fixed, with the Ash and Iron update. If you're unfamiliar with what these do, I'll quickly go over it. When you put down a rift, you'll get these seekers that spawn out every now and then that will track to your teammates and do different things depending on the rift that you're standing in. For Healing Rift, these seekers will grant a large amount of instant health and begin health regen. For Empowering Rift, the seekers provide a 35% damage boost instead. That is a crazy high number, up there with the highest damage buffs in the entire game. And given that these seekers track automatically, these boots are a source of passive healing or damage bonuses without needing much brainpower. However, the main reason we use these boots is because of its interaction with Well of Radiance. Well counts as an empowering rift to these boots. So when we go into damage and I drop a well, as long as I'm standing in it, all of my teammates are getting a 35% damage boost rather than Well of Radiance's basic 25%. By simply having these boots equipped, your entire team's damage should go up by about 10%. Now, for those interested in what my subclass looks like, it's the usual support Warlock build. For neutral game, I stay on Healing Rift to make some use of Boots of the Assembler. This is especially effective for team support and encounters like Koragos and Agrios, that's the Harpy and Hobgoblin. My melee ability is Celestial Fire for infinite range and easy radiant procs. The grenade is, of course, Healing Grenade, and then our aspects, the first one is Icarus Dash. Please do not underestimate how strong instant movement is. You have no idea how many times this ability has saved my life on encounters like Iatros and Koragos, Iatros for falling off the map, and Koragos dodging the giant laser. And then my second aspect is Hellion. We run this one because I find the extra lethality very valuable during mid-game, and this aspect will actually add a pretty sizable amount to your personal damage against bosses. And then for the fragments, we run Ember of Benevolence for more ability spam. You know how powerful this is. Then we do Torches to make myself and others radiant, Ember of Searing to regen our melee on scorched enemy kills, and then Singeing to refund our class ability when we scorch things, which in and of itself is somewhat a loop because our class ability spawns Hellion, which scorches things. Now, aside from our exotic armor piece and subclass, what stats am I taking in? Well, due to Notswap being very restrictive on what you can run in game, my main focus was doing maximum damage. That means I created a loadout that had the proper stats for a DPS phase, which means having as close to 200 super and 200 weapons. In this case, including fonts, we're looking at 200 super and 160 weapons. My class stat is a bit lower than I like, but you gotta make do when Notswap is as bad as it is. And then lastly, where weapons are concerned in this build, obviously you should know to cater whatever you're using to the current encounter that you're actually on, but for the most part, Mint Retrograde and Yeartide Apex don't come off. And that's it for all of my builds. Again, we're not getting super creative over here. Someone on the team has to be the dedicated support Warlock, and I'm more than happy to fulfill that role. Also, I'd like to shout out my friend Llama. Thank you for having me on the channel. And for all you guys watching, I would love to have you guys come by our streams and watch us compete this Saturday, where we're hoping to take home the W. And I think that's it.
Okay, when it comes to Hunter, I'm gonna try and keep things as short as possible. Try not to yap too much. I am almost always guaranteed to be on a Prismatic Hunter. 99% of the time, I'll be on something like Inmost Cert for the mid game. This is basically like the invincibility class item. Hopefully everybody knows about that by now. Within Prismatic, Golden Gun, pretty obvious. This isn't really for damage. It deals decent damage, but it produces 2 orbs of power, big orbs, every shot that you land that's critical, up to 6 orbs for your Titans, for your Warlocks. So it's just really good at helping the more important supers and the real damage dealers sustain their damage and their survivability if you're, trying to help keep one Warlock to permanently have a well. I really like the Threaded Spike and Grapple combination for mid-game. Sever is really, really underutilized. I feel like this lowers the damage or the outgoing damage of enemies when you hit them. So love that, especially against like a Wyvern. Aspect-wise, Ascension almost always stays on. This is really OP. Amplified on demand makes it basically so you're never getting shot at. I like Gunpowder Gamble just to keep reprocking Woven Mail. This is also really good for ad clear. If you don't like this, you can just run Stylus Executioner. This is a much better aspect to run in something like Iatro, Iatros if you're doing the jumping section where you're dealing with the imps, because you can use something like Tanashas with chill clip, kill something, stay invis, wait for the next set of platforms to spawn, and interact while you're not getting shot. That's kind of the subclass setup and the exotic setup that I'd recommend for like 90% of hunter players to use. I'll cover stats more in detail after I go over like every single build that I'm running. One thing I did want to cover, at least like mods for most of these builds, is the fact that my health stats really low. I do have Goldie, which gives me resto through Faceted Purpose, but I still do like having healing on demand. Whenever you ascend with like double powerful attraction, you can pick up all the orbs within that radius and get a ton of health back. If your health stats really low, you don't get as much health. So for that reason, I like running double recoup. I'm pretty sure this still works. If you have one copy, it's 15 HP per orb. If you have two copies, this jumps all the way up to 70 HP per orb, which is how it used to work. So this is super OP. And then I guess the rest of my mods that I like to use, I'll pair with something like Yeartide Apex. I do think Reckless is like a better overall option for this raid, but it doesn't go up to tier 5, so you miss out on some of the mods. This also has attrition orbs, which is really useful. I have a siphon mod on my helmet, 2 finders, one for special, one for heavy. This keeps my ammo really, really well sustained. I have a loader mod, a heavy-handed mod, and I think that's basically it that's super important. And basically all those orbs are going to feed into giving me special finis so I can produce ammo for me and my teammates. If you're running a primary, just mint retrograde and like finalities auger, which I think most people are going to be doing for probably every boss, this means that you can just spam the hell out of mint retrograde, which is really, really useful in your mid game. Another build that I do have on Prismatic relies on Renewal and Star Eater. In a case where you want more potency for your golden guns, I think everybody knows how Star Eater works. And then to kind of get the survivability back that you lose from taking off Inmost Cert, you're just going to rely on Dusk Field Grenades. You can throw these down, give yourself Frost Armor. I think that's up to like 30% DR for you and teammates, anyone that steps inside. And then if enemies step inside that Dusk Field Nade, their outgoing damage is also reduced by 50%. You can combine that with a threaded spike, so you get like 50% reduced outgoing damage for that enemy, plus another like 40%. So you turn anything that's like super aggressive into basically a pea shooter. Really, really good for survivability. After that, I do have an Outbreak build. Can't imagine I'd use this, but I did want to highlight Outbreak is still really, really good. It still gens a ton of super energy for any roaming super. I know it at least works on Goldie, so this is really good. If you have like 1 or 2 people spamming this, it's usually enough nanites to make your super regen feel really good. And then you can get off like probably 6+ Goldies in any phase against most bosses, other than probably Iatros, because that's a shorter phase. So this is a really good option if you need to just print orbs for your teammates. I do also have a chicken loadout that's saved here. For anyone who doesn't know, chicken, it's just a DPS rotation, which is really, really good. It relies on Parasite and Mint Retrograde. So I do have a damage setup saved. The only 3 major things you really need is Mint, Parasite, and to make sure you at least have a holster mod on. Then lastly, I'm gonna be the person who's running as of right now and doing Tractor Cannon for Koragos, extending the damage phase, assuming that works the exact same way that it works currently. So for that reason, I just have a Tractor loadout. In Tractor, I think Inmost Cert is really, really useful. I'm doing this role just because I'm comfortable on it, and that's what my team decided. You can do this pretty much on any class. Inmost Cert is really good too because it keeps you with high ability regen while you're doing the mechanics. Grapple is also really useful to get Chronons that might spawn in a really inconvenient spot. So you have high ability regen, you get the DR from Cert, you move around a lot, and then if you do end up using your grapple nade, you can pop Transcendence, which is really useful. You can Tractor and then just keep spamming Smoke Bombs, which I have on my damage loadout here, to extend that 30%. So you can keep that extended. You can keep spamming the nades to keep your DR up. Basically, as long as you're not moving under the beam with the direction that the beam's going, it's pretty much impossible to die. Lastly, I wanted to cover stats. Stats are by far the hardest on Hunter to manage, especially with Notswap. Real quick, I did want to highlight that as I swap between my 2 builds, which is running and damage, the only main difference are going to be fonts and surges versus normal mods on the running loadout. None of my stats are changing as I'm toggling these 2 builds. The reason for that is because we found out yesterday that you are not able to have a single stat point change amongst your 2 builds. Otherwise, it will violate Notswap, which means you lose all your ammo, you lose all your abilities, all the ammo that's already genned on the ground. You're also going to be losing that too. So you need to make sure your stats are the same. So for that reason, I have 130 weapons, 140 super. When I go into my damage loadout, these don't change, but this 140 gets a 50 stat increase through my super fonts. So that goes up to 190. If I swapped this mod right here, could manage to get it up to 200. I don't think it's worth it. I think having the extra bit of class is what I want to go with, but you can kind of do whatever you want. The only downside is you're going to have things like your melee stat, your nade stat, your class stat feel a lot worse. And again, that's the reason that if I go to my running loadout, I'm locked at 21 HP or 21 health stat. So that's why I'm currently running double recoup, but this might change. The most important thing I want to mention, at least if you're a hunter player, In my opinion, where my stats currently sit, like 200 super, a little bit of weapons damage, I have 4.4% special and primary damage in PvE and 2.9% heavy damage. If you average this out, it's like 3.54%. Depends on how much damage you're doing with a heavy versus a special versus a primary. It all just depends. In my opinion, this is super negligible, like especially because hunters tend not to typically make up the most damage of the players on your team. The only person that should realistically be lower than a hunter is going to be a player who is doing tractor cannon and not on an actual heavy during a damage phase. So my whole point being, I think if you're struggling to survive in the day one, you're struggling to get to damage, you feel like your mid game just completely sucks, I would personally run something more like this. Tank all of your weapons, take that wasted 130 stat points, put them elsewhere. With this build, I would likely just swap every single mod, a super mod. And all of a sudden you can see I'm up to 145 super. If I were to go to my helmet and then throw on my super fonts, that is going to get me all the way up to 195 is pretty much max super. You have a really good mid game here, and you're getting the 40%, 45% increase in your super damage, no increase in your weapons damage. The other big missing exception is you don't really need ammo stat to gen ammo or weapon stat to gen ammo. Like if I'm up here, this gives me basically a 30% chance that when I make an ammo brick, it's going to have increased ammo within that brick, which really isn't that much. I feel like if you're not over at least 150 or 160, the 30% chance isn't really going to proc that often. And this also does not affect any gains that you have to your ammo stat bar. This doesn't affect how frequently you make ammo. It just affects how much ammo has a chance to be extra in that brick. The things that really are going to affect how much ammo you're generating and how you're filling out that meter progress is going to be the ammo generation stat of your weapon here. And that's going to kind of multiply or compound with your special ammo finders. These are just like direct multipliers. Major point being, this doesn't really help you that much. I don't think it's really all that worth it. If you want, you can just swap to a build like this, obviously bump up your super, make it higher than mine is here, and I think you'll be fine. That is pretty much everything I think you really need to know about playing a hunter for the epic raid. Hope that covers everything. Yeah.
So that is mine and my teammates' recommendations for the builds you should be using going into the epic version of the Desert Perpetual this weekend or just in future. Because remember, when you run this raid with at least 3 feats on, the Notswap modifier is just always going to be there, so this video should still be relevant in the time to come. So again, thank you very much for watching. I hope you learned something from this video, especially from my teammates, because, you know, they know a lot more about the other classes than I do, and I wish you luck, honestly. Good luck to any of you running the raid this weekend. I really don't know what to expect out of the experience, but I'm going to save my judgment for after we actually beat it. So good luck, and I will see you in the next one. So take care, everybody. Goodbye for now, dear viewer.